Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to another exciting edition of Hilaal Live. I trust you all had a lovely long weekend. Happy belated Heritage Day to everyone that celebrated. And we are currently broadcasting from the Cape Town studios. My name is Lukman Shadrack. Now, this week we'll be talking about the different ways that land can be owned. Last week we spoke about the People's Land Map and just how much public land is vacant and underutilized in Cape Town. This week, we look at the ways in which land can be owned by more than one person, by a collective, or a commune if necessary as well. Now, our communities need to know how to secure their homes, and by putting money together, this might be in our community's strongest option to purchase land or receiving donated land as well. In the event this happens, what are the structures that exist that help manage land together? Today we explore different kinds of ownership options, which fosters a sense of community engagement and understanding. Now, in studio, we are very privileged to have attorney at Legal Aid, Charlotte Makua. Charlotte, good evening and welcome.
Evening, and thank you for having me.
My absolute pleasure. We chatted to the team last week about the land map, and that was very, very interesting on how the analysis was done and the various forms of land that is vacant and still can't be accessed in many areas as well. What is the current situation of our land that is available at the moment?
Well, unfortunately, considering the age of our constitution, it is still bad. It is dire. We had hoped with the birth of the new constitution that we will be able to provide land to the people, as envisaged in our constitution. But it seems more and more, year after year, it becomes dire. It becomes even worse. We see what's happening in Joburg. We see what is happening throughout the country. The need is rising, and more, unfortunately, is expected from the state. But as to whether the need and the supply are able to match each other, that's where we're still struggling. Now, that whole conversation for today is to try to see how the resources can be shared to benefit both the state and the people.
Because that right there seems to be the stumbling block, is that there may unfortunately be too many chiefs in the pot right now, stirring the pot. And unfortunately, the message seems to be really going over our community's head on what exactly is needed.
Remember, the whole purpose of the Constitution is to be for the people.
Correct.
The basic that we have to secure, it's have we protected and have we delivered in terms of our Constitution? Right now, there's a shortfall. Now, how do we assist?
Bridge that gap.
Yes. How do we assist in bridging that gap with the state, with the people? Not being too much of a burden, also supplying this need where people themselves can grow.
Absolutely.
Because we have the assets. We are one of the countries that have the gold in its hands. But what are we doing with it? Is it benefiting a certain group, or is it providing for the entire nation? As what we would like to happen.
The situation in Johannesburg is just like every week some new stories coming out with regard that's unfolding. And it's so sad because all those lives were lost. And, it's now left people also without a dwelling.
It just goes to show how ignorant we have been. The need has always been there. What we've been doing about it, we've just been pushing it back and back, hoping something will miraculously happen, without having proper plans. We have all these resources available. Let's put them to full use. Let's get organizations, let's empower our own people. Because remember, with property comes ownership.
Of course.
With ownership comes independence. With independence comes what? Wealth.
Yeah.
You know, so we don't have to forever be waiting for the government to provide RDP housing. Help us, help you.
True.
Let's share so that we can all develop.
So in my introduction, I made mention about the various forms of ownership.
Yes, sir.
So what exactly are those forms?
Okay, the main one that we have is private ownership and state ownership.
Okay.
Now, private ownership, it's where we have the private individuals and organization owning the asset. Whereas the state ownership, it's when we have the state itself owning the land and we're waiting for the state to supply.
Okay.
Which is where now the gap is. Okay. Now, from those two main that I've already illustrated, we have then sections in between them. We have private houses, which we know we see every day in our locations and townships. Then we have sectional titles. Then we have communal land trust. We have cooperatives, and then we have communal properties.
Okay.
Yes. For the segment today, we will not be dealing so much into the private, but where the need is.
I see.
Yes.
Okay. Now, each form of ownership obviously comes with its own advantages, challenges, and implications for land and housing management use and affordability, for that matter. The choice of ownership model depends on the goal of the community's needs and values.
Yes.
Now, it's very important to explore these options thoroughly to make informed decisions about the future of the donated land and the impact that it can have on our community. What are your thoughts about this?
Let's start by saying communal ownership. This is where we have now the community itself standing up to say, once you've provided us with ownership of land, right? We will manage that property. We will make the decisions. We will share the decision as to what do we do with that land. Do we use it for residential? Do we do it for agriculture and develop businesses and provide for our households? What do we do with it? But of most important is with that communal land, we will have a constitution. Now that regulates what is to happen with the land and ownership going forward.
Gotcha.
That's the biggest, that is the biggest point. Now, what is required today? What is required is that the community itself will group itself. Then the minister will donate.
Okay.
To say, here's land. Then we form an association, and from that association we say, then what do we do with the land?
Okay. Now, on that point, there have been requests from the minister to release land to various communities. These types of requests have seemed to fall on deaf ears.
Yes.
What is the holdup with that?
You know, the sad part is we have an act, right? The State Land Disposal Act, which allows the minister to do that. But I think it's either one, ignorance, undermining, or the lack of knowledge how to go about it.
Okay, so the lack of knowledge I can understand from the community part. But if the request has been made, is it not the minister's their responsibility to say, guys, all right, you've given me 6 steps.
Yes.
You've missed 4 steps.
Yes.
Please, can you complete those 4 steps and come back to me?
This is not where we say now we're being undermined or we just maybe not
ignored.
doing our jobs to the fullest.
Okay, all right.
Because people are not so difficult. The need is there.
Right.
But if you go back to them and say, we have identified this and this is what we can do as the state, have a dialogue, communicate with them, tell them the difficulties. Then they come back and tell you what they're thinking. Sit down, come up with common purposes, and then we can take it from there.
I get you.
That's
all
what
right,
I'm saying.
So is that engagement happening? I mean, it has happened to a large extent, but we're still not getting answers from the minister.
There's been calls. We've seen calls from political parties, which I'm not going to name.
Correct, yes.
We have organizations like in the Funukwazi that are also canvassing this issue. We have, court documents that are being exchanged on a daily basis where people are being evicted left, right, and center. And the state has to be invited to all those eviction proceedings. Now, we cannot say that they cannot see the need. If a department is receiving more than 100 applications for eviction on a day, it goes to say there's a cry out there for something. So whether we can say it's ignorance or people dragging their feet, But there's still more can be done.
Of course. Look, I think to a larger point, the elections are coming up next year. Do you think, in your humble opinion, we are going to see a lot more engagement from the minister?
With politics, that's the gist of it.
Right.
You sell us the need, we come.
Right.
So if they know that we are crying out for help in this department,
and there's a massive crowd for help.
In this department called housing, that's where they're going to get us, to promise us these things which have been outstanding since the birth of our constitution.
Correct.
They have delivered, but not to the capacity of our country. They should also restructure to say the need is growing, we also need to grow with that. So starting from this year, we are going to see a lot of campaigns in that department.
Yeah, I think so too as well. I've already seen a few of the political parties already starting campaigning and using slogans like "We will promise you housing,"
we will give back the land.
We will give back the land.
Yes.
We will ensure that you are, comfortable in your communities. There's going to be a lot of that coming.
There's going to be a lot of that because they know that is our weakness. This is where we have the need. So just to lure us to get their votes, they're going to use that.
Okay. All right. We're going to take an ad break. We're going to open up the WhatsApp line as well. We're chatting to, from the Legal Aid Department, Charlotte Makua, who is giving us valuable advice around how to attain land in your various communities and the processes that one needs to follow as well. We are coming to election here, and we are going to hopefully see a lot more I want to say promises, but, for a lack of a better word right now with regards to how housing can affect our communities as well. You are watching Hilaal Live. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Hilaal Live. Thanks for watching us on channel 347 on DSTV, all the way from the Cape Town studios. I'm Lukman Shadrack. Today, the topic is on forms of land ownership, and from the Legal Aid Centre, we've got Charlotte Makua, who's giving us valuable advice. We're going to open up the WhatsApp lines as well, if you'd like to give us your thoughts with regards to land ownership in South Africa. You're more than welcome to do that as well. Charlotte, thanks once again for coming into studio and chatting to us. Let's chat a bit about communal ownership.
Yes.
Right? In terms of what does that mean to us and how do we go about obtaining communal ownership?
Communal ownership, it's, as I've discussed before, it's when we as a community get together and as a group of people, we jointly own and manage our own property. But the biggest point of this is that the minister has to approve our association.
Right.
We'll have to have a constitution that allows what our goals are and how do we go about achieving that, and what is going to be, your other succession plans and the management there.
Right.
Now, the state can donate the land. Then we take it from there as to what are we going to do with the land? Are we going to do agriculture on it? Are we going to build residence on it? We've seen some of this, not to a large extent, but a bit of it in KZN, which is now making headlines, with certain group of chieftaincy and the trust.
And yes, I've seen that make the news. Right.
Yes, not.
Okay, so is that still going in and out of court? Have they resolved it?
It's not going to end now. That I can say. It's going to take time because this affects somebody's wallet.
Of course, yeah. That's always the case, though,
yes.
Isn't it? Okay, let's move on, and we're not going to get too political today.
No, please. Please.
Let's get into some of the cooperatives in terms of how is that handled in our constitution.
Well, what we have with cooperatives is the main focus of it would be, if we have a housing cooperative, it's how do we provide housing to our members? Now we'll have to register a cooperative, and it can come in different forms. We can either have it as a private cooperative, a secondary cooperative. Now, the difference between the primary one and the secondary one, it's the number of members that are there, With primary cooperative, we have 5 persons that can manage that cooperative.
Gotcha.
And then with secondary, we just need 2 or more.
Okay.
Of importance, again, it's that we must meet before we take this further. We must meet as the members and say we are now registering our constitution. Then once we've adopted the constitution, we go register it, and then we select the members that are going to be active participants. Then we take it from there.
I see.
Yes.
Do you find that there's still a bit of red tape with that process?
Red tape, it's because of lack of knowledge.
Okay.
This is something that we can easily overcome. You know, if we know the procedure, if we are advised and directed as to what to do, and we have training and facilitators, it can be done.
Okay, so your advisors get the proper advice during this process.
Consult
There we go.
officers like
yourself, yeah?
like ourselves, consult other organizations, like we have our university clinics. We can also consult that we have private attorneys that can give direction. But this is a sphere that can also be looked into.
Okay. Then there's something called communal land trust. Okay. That also allows for our communities to own land as well.
Yes.
How does that work?
With that one, we have to register a non-profit organization.
I see.
Okay. With the registration itself, we'll have to have a name. We'll have to have our founding papers. We'll have to have our constitution. And then we go register that land.
Okay.
But of importance, this one separates the land to the building.
I see. Okay.
So who owns the land,
Right.
who owns the building.
Okay.
Now, where the constitution will then come into place to say what are the terms and conditions. What do we do going forward? How do we manage it going forward?
So you're trying to. So you're saying is that the land can be owned by the NPO, but the building can be built by someone else.
We as a community, that's where we come in.
Right.
If you just provide me with one asset, you can see what happens. You know, it's not just that we are so poor that we cannot afford. Give them plots. See what they do with those plots. That's all that we say. Let's have an NGO. Let's manage that to make sure that we do not use it recklessly.
Right.
Then we can take it from there.
Okay.
Just give us a start. Then the people will manage it.
Yeah, that's so important. You know, most NPOs require a particular, piece of land so that they can, assist the community in some of the great work that they do.
And that's all we need.
Because most of the funds are taken out or taken up for rent and expenses. So if they have a piece of land, that reduces the expenses tremendously.
Cuts that. And then that's why I said with just ownership of land, of building, it opens up this whole independence. We know the struggles of our country. We have seen what has been happening with SASSA in the past month. If we had options like this available, the need for finances would also not be so bad. It affects education as well. We can assist with hospitals and all those things. Because when we start having a community, you're not only talking about housing. You have a hospital, you have a mall, creating employment, you have a school, educating our kids, all those things. And it's a collective that goes to finance and the wealth of the country. So if you cannot empower your own people.
Yeah. I think we should put you in line to run for a political party because you've got some great advice that can be definitely passed down to our communities as well. Another form of land ownership.
Yes.
And you touched on it very briefly earlier, is sectional title.
Yes.
How does that work, and give us the parameters around that?
I think most people know about it. They just don't know to what extent.
Right.
Right? So it would be a whole scheme.
Right.
I just own a portion of it. That would be my unit, my house. We see that a lot in our townships and in our communities. We'll have our townhouses, our flats. I just own a portion of it.
Correct.
And then we have what I don't share, what we use as a collective, as a community. We have the communal land.
Gotcha.
Right. That would then come with rules and regulations. You can do that, you can do that. Right. Now, over and above that, different from the others, we have a body corporate. Now, this is the residents themselves. They elect a corporate to say, okay, then you then manage, right? You come, you get instructions from us. Instead of all 100 of us being in the forefront and demanding, you will have what our instructions are, you will see how we put them on paper, and then on a yearly basis, we have a meeting. Then you give us feedback as to what is happening, how we're managing, and how we're developing.
Yeah. So the definite example of something like a body corporate is your townhouses and
Yes.
your complexes.
Yes.
And can that be quite tricky? Because in most instances, owners then rent out their properties to tenants.
Yes.
And tenants are not always as responsible as the owners when renting out in that complex. And that's where the challenging part can come in. Yes, you've got a body corporate, but the owner is still responsible for whatever happens in that unit.
Which is true. That is why when you become part of that, you know what you're binding yourself into. We as a corporate have these rules in place. So if you decide to have your tenants in, it means they must also fall into that.
Right.
If you do not comply, then we have our penalties. We have our levies imposed on you so that we can see to the smooth running of this scheme.
Okay, very quickly, couple of minutes left. Let's run through the various forms of land ownership for our audience.
We have communal land. We have community trust. We have sectional titles. What is the last one?
The cooperatives.
The cooperatives as well.
Yeah, so for all of those, each one has a definitive process on how the process needs to happen and how the minister then responds.
This is how we say now, identify your goals, come consult, then we can take you through the process itself.
Okay. At the moment, we do see quite a few articles being published about land that's available
and not being used.
And not being used. And to a large extent, I think our communities really think that this is quite an easy process. They think that, what is your advice to communities that would like to, look for a particular piece of land they'd like to apply? What is your gut telling you in terms of where the challenges come in?
They would think it's easy because no one is telling them what the process is. So if they identify, they go to the municipality, the closest municipality, then they'll be able to be directed as to what the direction is, who the owner of the land is, what is the purpose for that land. Because the land might be there, but the government has a certain purpose for it, to build a certain school, a certain structure, to renew, revamp. If we don't talk to the community, they will obviously think it's just sitting there, not being used to the fullest. Okay. That is why when they identify, then they'll come to say, what do we intend doing with the land?
Okay. Does Legal Aid get involved in something like this? Can you assist from a department? Legal
Aid South Africa does assist. Where we cannot assist, we have our sister cooperatives, our sister stakeholders,
right.
Our universities. They can assist.
Take it further as well.
Yes.
Charlotte, thanks very much for coming into studio.
Thank you for having us.
And for sharing much needed knowledge about a very important topic that affects our communities. And may all your future projects go from strength to strength.
Thank you very much for having
us.
You're
welcome. And that's from the Legal Aid, Charlotte Makua, who's given us valuable advice around the forms of land ownership. After the break, we chat about the Imam Haroon Foundation and a very exciting initiative that's happening this weekend, inshallah. You are still watching Hilaal Live.